Hello there. Welcome back. This is session number 3 of the Family Federation True Love Seminar, short version. Purpose and Human Responsibility. In the previous session, we introduced the 3 topics we will be covering in this seminar: my dream, human responsibility, and restoration. When it comes to my dream, we explained that although there is one obvious dream we all share, which is world peace, there is another more internal dream we have not yet fully been aware of, and that is the dream of having true parents. One reason this truth is so important is that through it, our purpose of creation becomes clear. To know our purpose is pretty important. It's what gives us meaning and value to our lives. When it comes to purpose, we need to realize that although I may be able to decide my purpose when it comes to choosing what I want to do, what are my hobbies, what my job will be, my career, and so on, when it comes to the deeper question of purpose, when I ask myself, why I am here, why do I exist, I have to stop and ask the origin of the universe, right? Why did you create me? And now, knowing that God is our invisible true parent, the answer becomes self-evident. A parent can't experience love as a parent without having children to love. In other words, God created man and woman to be his children, whom he could love, and through that love experience the joy of being a parent. But for the joy to be complete, the object of God's love must be able to reflect God 100%. Think for a moment. The more the object of your love resembles you, the greater the flow of love and the greater the joy. For example, a plant would bring you more joy than a rock, right? And a pet might bring you more joy than a plant. But ultimately, neither rocks nor plants nor animals can bring us the joy that we seek. Only another person has the ability to do that, to fully reflect our feelings, our thoughts, our interests, and ultimately our love. This is also true for God. For God to experience 100% love and 100% joy, God's object must be able to reflect God 100%. This is the nature of God's true love, to invest himself 100% into the object of his love, man and woman. In doing so, he made it possible for us, his children, to be able to reflect his love 100%. Knowing this, from this point going forward, we're going to look at the ways God intended for us to reflect him. And there are 3 points we're going to cover. Number 1, God is eternal, therefore we must be eternal. Number 2, God gave us 3 types of relationships through which we can reflect him. First, with God as individuals. Second, with others, most especially in a family. And third, with the things of creation. And number 3, God is a creator, therefore we must also be creators. All right, so let's start with number 1. God is eternal, therefore we must be eternal. Just as God created us with a mind and a body, God created the cosmos with an internal and external aspect, the spiritual world and the physical world. However, not everyone is aware of the existence of the spiritual world. Some have no idea that it exists. But if you believe that God exists, then it's easy to believe that the spiritual world exists. God, who is eternal, who created humanity to be his children, would not create us to be temporary beings who live and then die, to be gone forever. There is nothing more painful than to lose the ones you love. For God, such a world would be a living hell. No, God created his children in his image, And like God, we were created to be eternal spiritual beings. So, we each have a spirit self and a physical self. Our spirit self has a spirit mind and a spirit body, and our physical self has a physical mind and a physical body. We also have 5 spiritual senses and 5 physical senses with which to perceive the 2 worlds, right? So we can see things, touch things, taste things, smell things, hear things. All the senses that we have physically, also we have them spiritually. Since humanity deviated from the path of true love and pursued the path of self-centered love, our spiritual senses became dormant, or we could say they became closed. However, on occasion they can be opened. That is when people have what are called spiritual experiences. The most critical truth, the truth that everyone needs to realize, is that unlike our physical self, which is temporary and will come to an end, our spiritual self is eternal and will continue to live on in the spiritual world. So the best way to know the reality of the spiritual world is to have a spiritual experience. Many people have had spiritual experiences and have testified that the spiritual world exists. In the Bible, in Matthew 17, 1-5, it is recorded that after climbing a mountain, Jesus' disciples saw him through their spiritual eyes. They saw light emitting from his face, and they saw and spoke with Moses and Elijah, who had been physically dead for hundreds of years. Some people don't believe in the spiritual world because it is often spoken of as a kind of dreamlike, airy-fairy place. This is not what we're talking about. Dreams take place in your mind. They are not the spiritual world. Dreams can be influenced by the spiritual world, and God could even speak to a person in their dreams. But by the same token, dreams can be influenced by the physical world. For example, by what you eat or what you experience in your daytime. No, dreams are not the spiritual world. The spiritual world we are talking about is a substantial reality. In fact, it is more substantial than the physical world. Compared to the spiritual world, the physical world is much more changeable. In the physical world, even mountains are eventually eroded away. Then you may ask, if the spiritual world is so substantial, then where is it? That's a good question. And the answer is, it's right here where we are. The physical and spiritual worlds exist in the same cosmos. You may ask how the physical and spiritual worlds are able to exist together in the same place. Fortunately, we live in the age of science, because it's science that will give us the answer to this question. Tell me, how are light waves and sound waves and microwaves able to exist in the same space? The room we are in is full of light, right? Wherever you go in the room that you're in, you can see light. Then explain to me, how is it that you can hear my voice? Wherever you go in the room that you're in, you can hear my voice, right? If the room is full of light, how can it also be full of sound waves? And the room is also full of microwaves, right? Everyone in this moment, they could be watching a different video on their smartphones at the same time. Then how can a room full of light waves and full of sound waves be a room that's full of microwaves? And the answer is found in the nature of energy. Energy of different wavelengths don't bump into each other. They can exist in the same space. Here's a chart of the electromagnetic spectrum. The amount of energy that we can actually perceive with our senses is quite small. See it there? It's that small sliver. Okay, that's what we can actually experience, what our senses can pick up. Once we understand that even in this physical world, there are many kinds of energy that exist in the same space, it becomes clear that the spiritual world can also exist in this same space. We can think of the energy that God used to create the spiritual world as being extra fine. And so, unless you have an instrument that can perceive that spiritual energy, you won't be able to perceive or experience the spiritual world. This explains how the spiritual world can be substantial, be made of energy, and be right here, and yet we don't experience it. This is basically how our path of life works. We begin life in the womb of our mother, where we live for about 9 or more months, right? Give or take a few days. It's temporary, but it's very important. In the womb, we are preparing our lungs, our stomach, our eyes, our ears, and so on, so that when we are born into the world of air, right, we have lungs to breathe the air, and we have a stomach we can eat the food with. In other words, we can survive. Our life on earth, like our life in our mother's womb, is also temporary, right? In a sense, it's a second womb, right? So our life on this earth, in this world of air and sunlight, instead of 9 months, if we're lucky, we may live to be, 90 years or even 100 years? And like our mother's womb, this life is equally important, because it's in this life that we prepare ourselves to survive and function in the spiritual world, which is our eternal home. What do we breathe in the spiritual world? We breathe true love. This means if we don't learn how to give and receive love in our physical life, we're going to be in big trouble when we enter the spiritual world. It would be like a person who didn't develop their lungs while in their mother's womb. For that person, for their entire life, they would have to be hooked up to a breathing machine. How miserable would that be? This is why true parents are so important. It's through true parents that we learn true love. Now, let's move on to point number 2. God gave us 3 relationships through which we can reflect Him. With God as individuals, with others in a family, and with the things of creation. Actually, these 3 relationships coincide with the 3 blessings that God gave to the first man and woman in Genesis 1:28. Those blessings were to be fruitful, multiply, and have dominion over all things. Let's start with the first blessing, to be fruitful. This is about me as an individual relating to God. What does it mean to become fruitful? A tree is only able to bear fruits when it reaches a certain level of maturity. For us, it's the same. We first need to mature our hearts and become a true person before we engage in romantic sexual love and produce children. Earlier, we explained that God is both masculine and feminine, as reflected in all things in creation, which are created in pairs. But there is another dual quality that exists throughout God's creation. Everything has an internal nature that guides it, and everything has an external form, or a body, that is guided. Particles, atoms, molecules, DNA, and plants, they are all guided by invisible forces of nature, which make them act the way they act. Animals are guided by instinct to act the way that they act. And we have a mind that guides our bodies to act the way that we act. Right? So here's a brief demonstration. Okay? See my hand? Okay, in my mind I'm going to say, hand go up. Watch what happens. Amazing. And then I'm going to say, hand go down in my mind. And what happens? Amazing. All right? So you see, our mind guides our body. This means that God, the original being, must also possess an internal nature and an external form. God's internal nature is God's mind and heart. God's external form is the energy by which God created all things. Right? Similar to God, we also have a mind with a heart, right? And we also have a body, which is made of energy. Then, what does it mean to become mature in heart as an individual? It starts with our hearts becoming aware of God's parental love for each of us. When we realize that our existence came from God, that our freedom to love as we choose and to find joy in life all came from God, and when we realize that everything that is good, everything that is true and beautiful in us and in the world around us, it all came from God, then what ought to happen in our hearts? The natural thing is to feel gratitude. Gratitude to God. Gratitude is an expression of the heart. It is the first step in growing our hearts to maturity, to become a person who brings joy to God. With gratitude comes the desire to make God happy. How do we make God happy? We make God happy by putting our sense of gratitude into action in the life we live. When, with gratitude, we put God first in our hearts, meaning when we desire to make God happy more than we want to make ourselves happy, this brings God great joy. And not only God, but the person who made God happy will also feel joy. This is the beginning point of learning to practice true love, to live for the sake of others. This kind of heart, the love that puts my parent first in my life, has a name. We call it a filial heart. You may not have heard that expression before, okay? Filial heart. The Korean term Mother Moon gave for this expression is hyojeong, okay? Hyojeong. This is the love a child returns to their parent after they have received their parent's love. Such a person becomes a visible manifestation of God. When a person behaves in this way, God is able to dwell within them, and the joy God experiences is shared with that person. This enables this person to feel their own sense of value and self-worth. And most importantly, this person would not just be a true person, they would be God's beloved child, to whom God would be able to say, wow, the way you live your life, that's exactly how I would want to live. Jesus was such a person. He was God's first filial son, the son who reached full maturity of heart with God. This is why, through his life, others were able to see and feel the presence of God. On the foundation of fulfilling the first blessing, we are each to fulfill the second blessing, to multiply. This blessing is all about the fulfillment of our ultimate dream, to become true parents. When a man who is God's son and a woman who is God's daughter unite together in love as husband and wife and receive God's blessing on their marriage, they become a couple that fully manifests God's masculine and feminine nature. And then at this point, something miraculous happens, something that eternally changes the cosmos. What is it? A new child comes into the world. Through the union of love between man and woman, a child is born. A new, unique, and eternal child of God comes into existence. This is a cosmic event. It is the moment a man and woman are transformed from being a couple to becoming parents. If you are not a parent, talk to someone who is. They will testify that the experience of becoming a parent, the sensation that takes place, is almost as though something physically changes in your heart. I know because I had that experience. When I was in the operating room, my wife had a C-section, and when my first child, my first son, was born at that time, it was a transforming experience. Okay? When you look at the newborn, when parents look at their newborn, they know that no matter what, good or bad, they will never stop loving this child. In this way, God's invisible nature as a true parent becomes a substantial reality. This is the fulfillment of God's dream. This is my dream. This is the place where God, the invisible parent, through his son and daughter, becomes the visible true parent. This is the place of joy for God, for man, and for woman, and for the child. This is the place we call home. This is where we know who I am, why I'm here, and where I'm headed. But it doesn't stop there. If the first man and woman had fulfilled my dream and become true parents, then that family would have grown to become a heavenly society, a heavenly nation, and eventually a heavenly world, one in which people would practice true love, a world in which all people would live in peace as one family under God. And this would be what? This would be a place of incredible joy. For God, the bigger the family, the bigger the joy. To help us grasp this, let's use the analogy of a seed and the tree it produces. If the seed, meaning the first man and woman, is healthy, the entire tree is going to be healthy. Likewise, if the seed is bad, the whole tree is going to be bad. This analogy is going to help us explain the situation of our world and how we can fix it. All right, now let's conclude with the three blessings with blessing number 3, to have dominion. If the first couple had fulfilled the ideal of love in the family, God was planning on giving them the responsibility to care for and love all of God's creation, the natural world. Having realized true love in their lives, instead of polluting and destroying and using the creation for selfish gain, the human family would have cherished God's creation as the greatest gift. We would have used it to express our love for each other through our careers, our hobbies, our homes, the food we eat, the clothing we wear, the cars we drive, the music and forms of art that we create, and everything that involves God's creation. These are the three blessings. This is how my dream was to be realized. If we were to put the purpose of creation into one word, it would be joy. But as was mentioned before, my dream was never realized. Instead, we find ourselves in a world that often appears to be more like a nightmare. To discover what went wrong and how to fix it, we need to look into the next topic of our seminar, human responsibility. Somehow, the first man and woman, instead of following the path of true love and becoming true parents, they chose the path of self-centered love. To help us understand how this happened, let's consider how all things in God's creation become what they are meant to become. All things in God's creation, they become what they are to become by passing through a period of growth. We divide this growing period into 3 stages: formation, growth, and completion. So the question is, how do all things know how to pass through this growing period? How does a seed know how to grow to produce a blossom and a fruit? How does an egg know how to hatch and grow to become a mature bird? How does coal know how to mature into becoming a diamond? And the answer is fairly simple. All things are able to do what they do because they are guided to do so by the laws of nature. Everything is dominated and controlled by the laws of nature. Right? We study them in school. Laws of physics, laws of biology, laws of chemistry, and so on. We call these laws God's principles of creation. These laws automatically guide all things to be what they are to be. This means that everything in the natural world is doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing. Therefore, the natural world cannot do anything that is wrong or evil. But a world controlled by principles and laws, although evil can't exist, such a world also leaves no possibility for love. Love, if it is controlled by laws, is not love. Love must be a free choice made from the heart. So, how did God intend for love to come into his creation? That was why he created man and woman. He created us to be his children. He created us with the capacity to love. Our physical bodies, like all things of creation, they grow by the guidance of natural law. But our spirit, most especially our heart, is not controlled by law. It does not mature automatically. Then who decides the direction of our heart? It's not God. it's me. God gave us the ability to love, and with that he gave us responsibility for our hearts. This is the meaning of human responsibility. We decide the direction of our heart. Then, what are the possible choices when it comes to the heart? The heart can go in two possible directions. One is the path of true love, the love that lives for the sake of others. It begins with a filial heart towards God. We mentioned this earlier. This is the path of love that enables us to become God's true child. This is good. The other path is the path of self-centered love. It seeks to make myself happy, even at the expense of others. It seeks my own separate dream at the sacrifice of God's dream. This is evil. Now, let's talk about the practical reality of love. If you have a young man and a young woman, maybe around 16 or 17 years of age, growing in a relationship with God, but not yet fully mature in heart, what is going to be the greatest source of temptation? What is the one force that could cause you to turn your heart away from God, away from the path that wants to put others first, and instead put your own desires at the center of your heart? I think you already know the answer. It is romantic sexual love. Romantic sexual love is the one force that can blind a person to the bigger picture, to the true purpose of life, and to the happiness of others. It can blind us to my future happiness, to the happiness of my spouse, the happiness of my future children, and most especially to the happiness of God. Knowing this, God gave guidance to the first man and woman regarding romantic sexual love through the three blessings. Remember, we just mentioned the three blessings. He told them to be first, what? Fruitful, which means to first grow to maturity, and then they could multiply. In other words, he guided them to first become a true person, a person of filial heart, someone who's able to love the way God loves. Only then were they to join together in a relationship of romantic sexual love as husband and wife. Isn't this how a good parent guides their children, even in this fallen world? Parents tell their children, before you start having sex, before you start making babies, first get your act together. Mature and become a good person. If you're a good person, you'll be a good parent. Your children deserve to have good parents, not someone who is self-centered, who's going to run off as soon as things become difficult. In conclusion, God gave us responsibility for love. This means that it is not God who ultimately completes our creation. That's our responsibility, given to us by God. So, as you may have noticed, we haven't yet explained the third point as to how we reflect God. Do you remember? God is the creator, therefore we must also be creators. When we choose to fulfill our responsibility and faithfully keep our hearts aligned with God's heart, we become co-creators with God. We complete the creation of the most important part of God's creation, the human heart. In doing so, we share with God in the responsibility for fulfilling God's dream, which is also our dream, to become true parents. But that didn't happen. Our first ancestors chose the path of self-centered love. And instead of humanity living together as one family, human history has been a nightmare filled with pain and suffering. We call this the human fall. There's one final point to mention before we conclude this session. For those who have studied the Bible, this understanding of the human heart and our failure to fulfill our responsibility finally gives us an accurate interpretation of the revelation that was given in the book of Genesis, of the fall of Adam and Eve, who ate the forbidden fruit in the Garden of Eden. You may be familiar with the story. The forbidden fruit in the biblical story was called the fruit of knowledge of good and evil. And what have we just learned? The only thing in all of God's creation which is not controlled by the laws of nature is the human heart. Only it has the potential to go in the direction of both good and evil. This means the fruit of good and evil in the Bible is actually referring to what? Romantic sexual love. What does this tell us? It tells us that the story of Eden, in which our first ancestors were driven away from God, is in reality a story of the corruption of the hearts of the first couple. Instead of standing as God's filial son and filial daughter who put God first in their hearts, they allowed themselves to be seduced by the temptation of romantic sexual love. Here's a quote from Mother Moon that summarizes our situation. God, our Heavenly Parent, created this world with a clear ideal in mind. At the very center of this ideal was the parent-child relationship, rooted in filial piety. If we consider the biblical story of the fall of Adam and Eve, we can understand that the root cause of the fall was a failure of Adam and Eve to stand in the position of filial sons and daughters of obedience, faith, and love before their heavenly parent, God. Their faithlessness undermined God's ideal of true love in the first marriage and the first family. We will end this session here. We have covered my dream and human responsibility. In the next and final session, we will look at restoration. So I'm looking forward to seeing you then. I think you're going to find it very helpful.